Hello, welcome to this episode of The Martial Truth. Problem with Ko-Ryu. So, before we get started on that, I just want to thank everybody. Closing in on 13,400 subscribers. Without you guys, couldn't do it. Looks like everybody really is enjoying the interviews. We'll continue with those. We'll have some coming up in the near future. Mark Wiley, Joe Swift, some other people I think people will find interesting. I know I'm finding it interesting and enjoying doing it, so I hope you guys like it too. Please click that like, share, subscribe, consider becoming a member, okay? We're up to 121 members, which is great, and we hope to do even more things in the future as we progress with the channel. So let's talk about Ko-Ryu. So I have a pretty serious background in Ko-Ryu. I started originally, which some people don't consider it a Ko-Ryu, which would be Muso-Ryu Iaido. All right. I started with a group in New York City, Manhattan, when I was about 16 or 17 years old. So my sword background is pretty substantial. I go way back with it. And I remember doing that, and there's no partner work involved. It's Iaido, so it's individual kata. You practice drawing the sword. But I remember even back then, some of the instructors would say, "Oh, you're not cutting the opponent, you're cutting yourself." And I would be like look at them as a 16 or 17-year-old and say to myself, "What is this guy talking about? I'm supposed to have a guy sitting in front of me who's trying to harm me, and I'm supposed to draw and cut him before he cuts me." And that's always was my approach when I was training in Muso-Ryu Iaido. And eventually I made Shodan in that art under Takeshi Mitsuzuka sensei. All right. I don't practice that art anymore. I haven't practiced in a long time. On occasion I do some of the kata just to remember them, right, and do them again. But from there I moved on to Jodo. So I trained in Shindo Muso-Ryu Jodo, and also the Setegata Jodo of the Kendo Federation, Jodo division. And initially it was okay. Then one of the instructors, a guy by the name of Martin Price, went to Japan, came back, his skill got much better, and that's when I got really serious with Jodo, and I tested 3 times in Japan, achieving the rank of Sandan, okay? Again, another art I don't really practice anymore. I got a little bit tired of all the political BS with it, and I just decided to focus on other things, all right? I also studied Yagyu Shinkage-Ryu for a couple of years with 2 Japanese instructors in New York. I was training at a dojo in Garden City, Long Island. I was the only non-Japanese in the dojo. They also taught Kendo. And what's interesting there is they were real serious. So when we did the 2-person kata of the Yagyu Shinkage-Ryu, when they were coming at me, they were trying to cut the target. They're trying to cut my neck, my arm, my head. Whatever they're doing, they're coming in, and it's on me to defend against that, which for me was great because it was more serious with a lot of intent on the attacks, all right? And in Yagyu Shinkage-Ryu, you use a Fukura Shinai, which is a piece of bamboo that's slotted, cut on the end, covered with a leather sleeve, so you can actually make contact on the body without causing injury. All right, so very interesting style. Enjoyed my training in that. All right, and then I also, for the last 15 years or so, have been training in Tenshin Shoden Katori Shinto-Ryu in the Sugino lineage. So my teacher is Sugino Yukihiro Sensei. All right, I've traveled to Japan several times to train with him. I travel every year up to Canada to train with him, and he's been to the New York school a couple of times also to conduct seminars, okay? I'm only ranked Shodan in that, but I feel so privileged to train in that, all right? In the Sugino dojo, it's all about being technically correct. In other words, accuracy. So you're expected to cut for the target, okay? And if you're not cutting for the target, you will be told very quickly your mistakes, okay? And then the art I trained in for a very long time also is Sosuishi-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, okay? I studied with Shitama Manzo in Fukuoka. I originally started with an FBI agent by the name of Gary Rowan here. He gave me a very good basic understanding of the kata. But when I went to Fukuoka, it became more clear. And through my study of other Ko-Ryu, I was able to improve upon my original practice in that art. So that's my Ko-Ryu background. All right. The problem with modern Ko-Ryu. So this isn't a problem for all of them. So in Kotori Shinto-Ryu, I don't see this problem. Okay. In Jodo, some dojo I see it. A lot of dojo I don't. Tenshin Shinryu, I've seen recent videos of them practicing. The attacks are more serious. So the problem with modern Ko-Ryu is, what I'm seeing is, I have plenty of video of Ko-Ryu from the 70s, 1970s up on the channel. And when you look at the intensity of the practice, it's much more intense. And now what's happening is many of the Ko-Ryu have devolved into martial choreography. So the attacks aren't real. No one's really trying to cut or strike the opponent when they're doing the two-person kata. Now again, when you initially train in Ko-Ryu, okay, right, it is choreography. You're trying to remember the moves. So you're only working with the partner. What's the move, right? Okay, all right. And the partner's not attacking that serious, right? But the heat has to be turned up as you train. So now in Sosuishi-Ryu, if I'm attacking in one of the forms where I'm cutting the neck with the short sword, well, I'm trying to cut your neck with the short sword. I'm not thinking about the move after that. My goal is, okay, on this form, my initial attack is to cut the neck. And I couldn't tell you how many times students, even some of my senior students who are training with me a long time, are shocked when my blade touches their neck and they didn't get their hand out quick enough to deflect or stop the attack. And, you know, again, that intent. The intent is for me to cut your neck. If I'm not trying to do that seriously, how are you supposed to develop martial skill? It's just not going to happen. So what happens is it becomes choreography. And when it becomes choreography, the art starts to suffer. And then the other thing is if this is a martial art, where's the martial? All right. So, you know, I trained in Muso-Ryu Jodo with Matsumoto Shigehiru in the Yoyogi dojo. And I learned right away as soon as I got there that, I mean, it was no joke. I mean, people were trying to cut me with the sword, with a bokken. And there were several occasions where I got hit with the bokken hard because I screwed up and didn't do what I was supposed to do. And those to me were valuable lessons because it made me wake up and say, okay, Calandra, get your act together and make sure you do the technique properly. So you had to always be on your toes. There was nowhere it was just two guys kind of going through these two-man forms like, you know, just for repetition's sake. And there was no intensity. No, that dojo was extremely intense, okay? Every time I took class there, I felt the whole time I was training there in that time frame, I had to be 100% on my toes. Everything was like real, like, oh my God, these guys are really going to try to hit me with this wooden sword. I better be on my toes. And again, that elevated my ability. It elevated my technical understanding of Jodo, okay, my handling of the weapon, because it wasn't just choreography. I had to literally defend myself against that wooden sword. And if I didn't, well, there's a chance I'm getting hit, okay? So in modern Ko-Ryu, what I'm seeing a lot, especially in like the jiu-jitsu styles, is no one's actually trying to hit anybody. No one's coming in really hard. And, you know, because of this, I see you're seeing a lack of a lot of young people practicing these ancient arts. And this is a huge problem for Japan. I mean, a lot of these ancient arts are dying out. I'll use Sosuishi-Ryu as an example. I mean, I don't think there's 100 practitioners worldwide. Worldwide, I don't think there's 100 people. I'm not sure there's 50 people practicing it worldwide. All right? I've had people tell me when they see us practice Sosuishi-Ryu, wow, you guys take some hard falls. Well, yeah, it's jujitsu. You're supposed to be throwing each other, all right? But, the thing is in my dojo, when we're doing the Tai Toshu kata, which is the defensive forms against an unarmed attacker, when I'm supposed to come in and shove you, I come in and try to shove you, okay? Now it's up to you to do your side of the kata properly so the technique works for real, all right? So one of the things we do when we train in Ko-Ryu in my dojo, and this is true for any of the Ko-Ryu we do. Now again, let me preface this again. If you're a beginner, this type of training does not happen with you. You're just trying to remember moves, work on your distance, work on your footwork, work on your handling of the weapon, whatever weapon that may be. If it's jiu-jitsu, you're trying to do the joint locks properly. You're trying to do the throw properly. So in the beginning of the training, it is more choreography based. It has to be. Okay, but now you're there a while. Okay, now we start turning up the heat. Now we start attacking more seriously. Now you're expected to be able to defend yourself. So, when we train in Ko-Ryu in my dojo, either side can go off script if the other side makes a mistake in the kata. So, for instance, if I come up and I go to cut the neck, and the person does their initial technique correctly and prevent me from doing that, but as they move, if they lose contact with my arm, and now my arm's free to do something, well, then I just come underneath and cut the body. And again, the first time I do that, the person's like, wait a second. And they think, well, that's not the kata. That's not the kata. And I'm like, yes, you're correct. That's not the kata. But I just tried to cut you with a short sword. And you did the technique properly. Your arm came up. But as soon as you went to do the next move in the kata, you took your hand. You removed your hand from contact with my arm. Okay. Well, now I have nothing to worry about on my end. I cut you. I go off script and I cut you. Okay. Same thing with Jodo. You come in, right, and attack with the sword, and I do my initial technique, and then I screw up on the next technique. The good swordsman takes advantage of it. And he goes off script and cuts me. And in practicing in this way, with this level of intensity, okay, and this training method, the Ko-Ryu stay vibrant. In other words, it's not just this archaic ancient art that we're practicing, okay, just because it's old and it's fascinating. It's still alive. It's still practical. Okay, when I'm doing a set of the Omote-tachi in Katori Shinto-Ryu, which is some of the fencing forms, when I'm doing it with someone else that has, years under their belt, and we decide to turn it up a notch, it really gives you the feeling of, wow, this is fencing, right? And, you're going at it, and, I'm trying to really cut you, you're trying to really cut me, and it just elevates it. And again, when you practice that way, sometimes your technique suffers a little bit because you're training in a more realistic way. And okay, so you do that, you go hard and fast, and you finished, and it was great. It felt really good. It felt very martial, right? You were trying to actually cut each other, and I had to really defend. And then you might realize, okay, well, there are a couple parts in there, I didn't feel I did quite properly. Okay, then you dial it back. Now you maybe just work those few moves, and you train those, right, and make sure you've got them, right? And, Sugino Sensei is often saying in the beginning of your training is that, slowly, correctly. I can always tell you to go faster. So it's important, but in that slowly, correctly, we're expected to cut for target, and we're expected to properly defend, all right? And this is the issue. In many of the Ko-Ryu practice I'm seeing, there's no intensity. There's no real attacks. It's often just two guys doing choreography. I've seen some recent video of some of these Sosuishi-Ryu groups in Japan. Besides the fact that they've taken it upon themselves to just completely change the kata, both the sword forms and the jiu-jitsu forms, their technique is terrible. It's terrible. There's nothing based on reality there. And real Sosuishi-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu is a very intense martial art. The techniques are outstanding. And people might say to me, well, how do you use that? Well, because for 22 years I was a police officer, and my goal is to place someone in handcuffs. And I used many of the techniques of Sosuishi-Ryu to subdue criminals that are fully resisting, that are fully fighting me and trying to really harm me. Now, if I was just practicing Sosuishi-Ryu in the dojo as choreography, I would be in for a very big surprise when it came to fighting for real. All right. Luckily, that wasn't the case. The techniques worked. I always jokingly say, well, why wouldn't they work? All right. They were working in 1650 to subdue professional warriors, the samurai. Okay. And they're working in the 2000s to subdue professional criminals. All right. I even created a set of Tai Hojitsu kata for handcuffing techniques based on the techniques in the Sosuishi-Ryu. I demonstrated those techniques for the headmaster in Fukuoka, and he couldn't believe what he saw. And he said through the translator, he says, wow, there's so many techniques from our kata in there. And I looked at him and said, well, yeah, all I've done is updated them for modern situations that we deal with as police officers. And again, this is how you keep Ko-Ryu alive. Muso-Ryu Jodo has absorbed other arts, and some of the kata were created fairly recently. All right. And the headmasters, the ones that were very serious in the training, they created new kata to keep the art alive and vibrant. All right. And I've done the same thing with Sosuishi-Ryu. I've created another set of kata. I don't lie about it. Like I told you, I have myself on video demonstrating it in front of the headmaster in Fukuoka. It's up on the channel. You can see it. All right. And, I say this is a set of kata I created for law enforcement people because I had a lot of law enforcement people training in the dojo. And the amazing thing is I do those kata. I hold a law enforcement seminar for 4 hours in my dojo for a bunch of NYPD cops that wanted to learn how to better control people. And after 4 hours, I'd often get calls. A few days later, a guy would call me and say, "Hey, 4 hours, the stuff you showed us works. I couldn't believe it. I did it last night. The guy went down so easy." I said, well, because it's based on actual. I did the techniques first. In other words, I learned Sosuishi-Ryu, I learned the joint locks, and then I was doing them for real on criminals. And then I realized how the criminals were reacting when I would grab their arm to move into a cuffing position, and that's what I based my counters on. So I had the uke, he would counter the way the criminal counters, and then the technique would follow up. So I figured it out first in actual combat. Oh, this technique works great. Oh, that technique works great. And I noticed that I was doing the same techniques over and over again. Why? Because the criminal resists the same way over and over again. There's only X amount of ways he resists, right? And I brought that and codified it into a set of 8 kata, right? Which again, how do you think these kata all originated? The kata didn't just appear out of thin air. The technique happened in combat, and then someone brought that technique into the dojo and said, "Hey, this happened yesterday, and this is how I reacted." And the headmaster said, "Oh, that's good. Let's add that. Let's add that to the curriculum." So, I have some pretty serious advice for Ko-Ryu if they want to continue to survive and not continue to die out. You must elevate the intensity of your practice. You must attack with serious intent. Your partner must be able to defend against your serious attack. One, this also creates a bulletproof mind. Now, you know the attack in the dojo, it's going to be real. So there's a potential you could get hurt. That forces you to elevate your game. And that's what martial arts training is about. The practice of Ko-Ryu, I love. I love Ko-Ryu. I wish I could study them all. Sadly, I can't. I don't have the time, right? There's too many of them. But the several I've studied, I absolutely loved. And I would hate to see them continue to disappear. Certain Ryu are very, very strong. Okay, Kotori-Shinto-Ryu. Muso-Ryu, still very, it's the most popular style of EI, probably in the world. Okay, Jodo, Shindo Muso-Ryu, very strong. And certain dojo practice extremely intense. Okay, very, very, very good, which is good. But then I see other Ko-Ryu that, when I saw a video of them in the 70s, I was like, wow, there's a lot of intent there. And now I see them practicing and I see, no, I'm not seeing it. And, part of it's the responsibility of the headmaster. If the headmaster is serious and he forces you to train properly, well, then the Ko-Ryu will be strong. If the headmaster slacks off and he doesn't take his responsibilities too serious, well, then we have a problem. That art's going to die. Someone once told me that the Kodokan used to, every New Year's, invite all the jiu-jitsu schools to the Kodokan to do demonstrations. And that when they first started doing that, there was over 200 jiu-jitsu schools, maybe even more than that, maybe 300. And as time went on, more and more and more of them died out. Now some die out because maybe they're not that good, but others die out because they just kind of lose their edge. And my feeling is a lot of Ko-Ryu have lost their edge, all right? And if you want to stay vibrant and you want to survive into modern times, you want to not lose that edge, all right? In the Yoyogi dojo under Matsumoto Shigehiro, he was extremely intense. A lot of people couldn't take it. I eventually left that dojo because I just didn't like the way he treated people. And I said, I just don't want to deal with this anymore, right? But as far as Jodo goes, his Jodo ability, off the charts. The intensity in that dojo, wow, all right? And, Sugino dojo is the same thing. When I'm training in Japan, when I'm pairing off with one of the senior teachers, I better bring my A game. And even when I bring my A game, I know I'm getting cut a couple of times as we're doing a training because I do something wrong or he senses a weakness in my position and I'm cut, counters me, all right? And that keeps me on my toes because, folks, that's what it's like in combat. So if you're going to just walk through kata and practice choreography, you're practicing dancing. You're not practicing martial arts. So if Ko-Ryu want to continue to thrive and survive, well, they need to turn it up a notch. And again, this is not for all the Ko-Ryu. The ones that I see that lack intensity, okay, you need to look at yourself and re-examine the way you practice, okay? This is important. We want these arts to survive. We don't want them to die out, okay? It's as simple as that. So, please, Ko-Ryu, practice with intensity, all right? Like I said, some of you do, many of you don't, all right? And this is a problem. And if it continues, we'll see more and more Ko-Ryu disappear. And what eventually happened with the demonstrations for jiu-jitsu on New Year's, I think last I heard there was only like 25 Ryu showing up, and maybe even less than that now. So it's a problem. We've got to stop that slide. We've got to bring Ko-Ryu back to a level of prominence where it's intense and people go, wow, that's a real martial art. All right. So hope you've enjoyed this one. It's an important subject for me. I have a deep, deep love for the Ko-Ryu. I still train in Sosuishi-Ryu and Kotori-Shinto-Ryu actively. I want them to survive. I want them to do better. So please, again, click that like button. Share, all right? Consider becoming a member. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. next week we plan on having another interview come out. And I couldn't do this with all you guys. Please, I appreciate every one of you, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Take care.